Well, here's something I wanted to ask you. And by the way, it's funny you mentioned Marie Antoinette. Here's a little challenge for our listeners out there. If you do go purchase the book, The Girl Who Was on Fire, I can tell you that Adrienne actually mentions the name Marie Antoinette somewhere in her essay. So if you can spot that, go find it and credit
you get a gold star.
You get to eat cake instead of bread.
Yes, like and we will let you eat it.
But what I was going to say is, I actually had the benefit of studying Roman history myself. That was my major at Columbia, and something I was thinking about when I read your essay, and this is just to play devil's advocate. It's almost like being Snow's advocate, really. That's what we should call it, because he is basically the devil.
Yeah.
But no, you mentioned how decadence leads to an inevitable decline, and I'm not disagreeing with you on that. And absolutely, your argument for moderation is very well presented. I'm just wondering, looking back historically, what civilization or society, though, has really sustained itself as long as Rome did? So on the one hand, you could say it did decline, but did have a pretty long reign, right?
But it's also a question of if we're defining Rome as inherently decadent, and you go through periods, because I too studied I studied Rome through sort of art and architecture, and you go through periods of the you have Nero, who fiddling all the burning, and who knows what really happened. But then you have I can't remember his name, but you have another emperor building on top of Nero's palace. No, not Caligula. That's another decadent one. Building the arena, which in a weird way we can parallel with the Hunger Games, but at the same time it was actually meant to be for the people. It was something that he didn't want the rich decadence of just the upper classes. He wanted the people to be able to be entertained as well. He wanted to be seen as the man of the people. And you go through periods with emperors where you have the incredibly decadent, self-indulgent emperor, and then you've got the man of the people, and you look at their statues and busts of themselves, and they go from sort of this total, airbrushed bust of an emperor and wearing a lion's head or something, and then you go to some statues with real veritas and verisimilitude where you see all the wrinkles and the lines on the face because they're supposed to look like a real person. So even though you could argue that Rome in general was a very decadent society, you still see it going in peaks and valleys, in true, over-the-top, insane decadence down to sort of a lesser form of decadence. It's still tricky because it was still a society that had slaves and, invaded other countries and then had those other countries sort of holding up the glory that was Rome. But I think you could still argue that Rome didn't maintain one certain level of decadence. Sure, and it basically sounds like what you're saying is they may not have been advanced medically enough to do plastic surgery, but their statues are like Heidi Montag's. Exactly. So that's pretty much what. Well, it depends on the statue, but yes, absolutely. And I mean, they did have they did paint themselves, and there was lots of wiggery action as well. So one thing that just maybe the last thing before we transition into Sam Cushion, who is actually waiting on the line. But one thing, Adrienne, that I really loved about your essay was your sort of optimistic interpretation of the ending of Mockingjay, which I'm like the only person who took it optimistically, aren't I? I know. I think that you are. I mean, so many people were disappointed in the ending. They found it very sort of dark and bleak. But, why do you see it as maybe brighter than most? Well, I see it brighter, namely because the main character, well, first of all, just in the characters, the main character survives. We get when you consider a Shakespearean play a comedy, it's the definition of a comedy is that there's a wedding at the end. So you get a wedding at the end. Exactly. And you do get sort of a happily ever after, their children and such. But more to the point of my essay, I explain how what happens is that District 13 and Coin in particular come along and they're offering this one alternative. It's either crazy decadence or total self-denial. And in both ways, you have a dictator in charge and telling the people precisely what they can and can't do, and how that total self-denial is going to result in a rebellion as well, of people wanting, once in a while I'd like to eat a chocolate bar, please and thank you. Like it's going to turn into something, and then it's going to build momentum, and then once more we return to decadence, and that's usually what happens. We continue in this cycle. Even Machiavelli talks about this cycle. And so what Suzanne Collins does, spoiler alert, is deny both Snow and Coin. She offers actually a third alternative, which is, I can't remember the name, the person who gets put in charge, and we've seen her in charge.
Oh, yeah, the one
in the field of war, and we know that she's a pretty reasonable person, and we get to see that people who we kind of respect have been put in positions of power, and it's kind of bleak. It's not a perfect world, but there aren't any more Hunger Games, which is a very, very big symbol, and Coin was about to do another Hunger Games, and likely it wouldn't have been just that one time. You sort of get that sense. So you can see when all the symbols from the book get sort of toppled, that she's postulating a third, argument, and the fact that she brings in children into this world suggests that there is a hopefulness for it. And even though it's a bit bleaker than I suppose, riding a horse back through this into the sunset or something, it's still, I think, highly optimistic that way, because if it wasn't meant to be, we'd know it. There would be, we would know.
Okay, great.
Yeah,
Before we get to Sam, because we've got to get to the program, two things I just want to say very quickly. We want to give Adrienne a chance to promote her work. Now you have two books, right, that are written. I think one is Alex and the Ironic Gentleman.
Yes.
Great title.
Oh, thank you.
And you have another one, but you also have a book that's coming out, right? A young adult book, The Friday Society.
Yeah. Well, I've got two what are called middle grade books. So that's sort of 8 to 12, early Harry Potter, Peter Pan, Alice in Wonderland, that kind of age range. One's called Alex and the Ironic Gentleman. The other one is Timothy and the Dragon's Gate, and they're both pirate adventure, really wacky, kind of absurdist romps with a lot of crazy characters and utterly hilarious. Let me just tell you. And then the young adult book, which is my first foray into young adult, is called The Friday Society. As you said, it's not going to be out until the fall of 2012, which is why I keep my fingers crossed that the Mayan dude, he just got like a hand cramp writing the map and just stopped, like map calendar. So that's my hope. And that's, I call it steampunk Charlie's Angels without the Charlie, because it's about 3 girls in Edwardian society teaming up to kick butt kind of thing.
Wow, that sounds awesome.
Yeah, well, sorry?
We're going to have you on to talk about that book.
It would be an honor.